May we start, please? Good afternoon. My name is Richard Carton. On behalf of the SCCA, I'd like to welcome you all to this event today. With the provincial election less than 2 weeks away, I think this in-person environmental issue forum, all candidates forum, will hopefully address, give you a chance to ask questions of the candidates and address some issues for you, or perhaps enable you to make a wise environmental decision when the election comes on the 19th of October. I want to say, before I go any further, that I commented about getting questions into the question desk there, and in fact, you're welcome to submit a question at any point in time, so don't feel shy about going over when an idea comes into your mind. The table's over there. The SCCA has been holding these in-person environmental political forums since 2011. And this year, as well as having the in-person event, we had a question and answer session on our page on our website, in which we asked specific questions. There's a lot of good background information. Specific questions were asked of the candidates, and they wrote very detailed responses. So if you haven't had a chance yet to look at that, I would encourage you to do so. And as well as thanking the audience, members of the audience, for coming, I would like to thank all of the political candidates, because we've asked a lot of them by submitting those written questions and then coming today to this event. The turnout's good, and I can only imagine how busy their schedules are, so thank you very much. Before we go any further, I want to acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the SCCA Nation, and to whom we owe a great deal, of course, for being the stewards, the excellent stewards of our lands and oceans, waterways, and species since time immemorial. So thank you very much to them. This election has a number of key election issues. All elections do, but I think, there's a sense of real urgency in this election because of these outstanding problems we're having: affordability, housing, healthcare. And yet we can never forget that the environment is so important as well. It can never be ignored. For moral reasons, we have to protect life forms on this planet. I think that's part of who we are as human beings. But also because a healthy planet is essential to our economic and social well-being. Not everybody realizes that the more the planet deteriorates, the greater the economic challenges are as well. So it should never be ignored. We're in the midst of a biodiversity crisis, and it's called the sixth extinction. That's what experts are calling it. And extinction is not a new thing, of course. Since 1500, about 900 species have disappeared from our planet, many of which we were directly responsible for. In 2019, the United Nations published a report that predicted that there are about 1 million species of plants and animals that are at risk of extinction, and many of those in the coming decades. So there is a real sense of urgency in terms of protecting them. Why are they disappearing? Well, we haven't done a very good job of managing the natural world. Destroying forests, the rate of deforestation is astronomical when you read the statistics worldwide. Acidification, warming of the oceans, etc. And part of that is just because we've mismanaged the environment, because we thought that there was enough there that it would last forever, but also because of climate change. And we know it's in the news regularly, the natural disasters that are happening around the world that are putting people's lives at risk, species at risk, and it's making it very difficult for people to think positively about the future and well-being, happiness of civilization when we see these urgent climatic, traumatic events happening. Of course, nothing can be solved immediately, but we have to believe on some level the government can make changes. In the province of BC, the government has quite a bit of decision-making ability about how land is used. And we have to believe that we're going to try to, or I would encourage you all to vote, of course, and to vote for candidates who, a candidate who will, when given the chance to vote on environmental policies, will take a very serious approach to the questions and the problems and vote on, yes, a green, no, sorry, I should mention green, I mean, just in a general way, a green approach to protecting our local environment.
Where are the chairs?
That's all I have to say. I'm going to pass the mic over to our moderator, Mr. Jeff Keithley, who many of you will know, and he will take over from there. Thank you.
My name is Jeff Keithley. I've got the distinct honor of being your moderator at today's forum. The key things, if you have a phone or something else that goes beep in the night, please silence it or turn it off before it goes beep in the night, or at least in the afternoon. The unisex washrooms are over there, beautifully done. They're the first time I've been here, first time I've seen them since I was here last, and they're a really good job. There's information tables, and we'd ask you to look at those at your leisure. We are all gathered here because we care about the environment, we care about the planet and the people who are living here. There's we often hear about UFOs, and we think they're somewhat mysterious, but in fact, they are intelligent alien forms coming to check out human progress. And they come by once in a while. It's true story, true story. Fortunately, one very brilliant 10-year-old computer savant happened to intercept some of the conversations and recorded it. And this is what she heard. Alien 1, Zokar, come have a look at this. The Earthlings appear to have developed space-based weapons. Alien number 2, Bolnor, you think we can report back that this is the sign that Earthlings are finally showing signs of advanced intelligence? Alien 1, I don't think so, Zokar. They've got them all pointed at themselves. The point here is that we only have one blue planet. We either look after it or we go down with it. Today's format is the candidates will all be giving us a 3-minute presentation on who they are and what their party stands for. We will then move into questions, and when we get into the questions, we have been gathering questions online. We really do wish that if you have a question, as Rich said, write it down and we'll mix it in. And we'll try and get as many as we can. The candidates will each have 2 minutes to answer the question. We have drawn straws, quite literally straws, to see who goes first. It will be first Randine, second Chris Moore, and Chris Hergesheim. And then we're going to flip it, so whoever goes first will go third the next time around. And we have a timer here. She will hold up a red card, or the yellow card, when there's 30 seconds left to do 2 minutes. And when she holds up the red card, your time is up. We will not cut you off mid-sentence. You've got about 10 seconds to wrap up. And if that doesn't work, each of these places has a trap door. And I have a button. And I will push that button and they will disappear forever. And we'll let you know the result after the election's over. Now our goal is to, the questions, the people are pulling together the questions, doing their best. If they're repetitive questions, either deal with it once or they make a composite question. And they'll bring those up. And around about 4:45, we will ask the candidates to each give a 1-minute summation. And then we'll get some closing remarks from the SCCA, and then we will have you out of here by 5 o'clock as promised. So we're here for a respectful dialogue, and we would ask that we give a respectful hearing to all of the candidates. By now, each of them will have, they're all brand new, none of these are run before. But by now they have figured out just how onerous a task it is just vying to get that office. It's a thankless task, but whoever happens to be a successful candidate will also find out that the volumes of material they have to read, the time spent in transport, is just an enormous time drain on anybody, no matter who they are. And we have a first past the post electoral system. There are many others, proportional representation. But regardless of what democratic system we have, every one of them depends on people like this who've got good character coming forward and being prepared to put their lives on hold to serve the constituency. So before we even get started, I want to give a good round of applause because they worked hard and they're going to work harder. So for the first question, this has to do with DRIPA.
Are we introducing?
Oh, yeah. Yes. All right. Okay. I'm going to sit down. You moderate. Okay. Okay. So now we're going to have 3 minutes from each of them. Randine goes first. Chris Moore goes second, and Chris Hergesheimer goes third. Hergesheimer. All right.
Thank you, Jeff. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Randine Neal. I'm the BC NDP candidate for Powell River Sunshine Coast. I live with my husband, Trevor, in Pender Harbor, Calpe Lane, and I have 2 wonderful stepdaughters. He has 2 daughters. The first one lives up in 100 Mile House. She's expecting her 2nd baby next March, so I am a step grandma, Jima, very excited, best thing ever, I must say. And my other stepdaughter lives in Haida Gwaii. She's a biologist, as is my husband, and she works for the Haida, and I think she mostly went up there for the surfing, but we just went up in April, and it is absolutely beautiful. I grew up on a farm in Vernon, a small apple orchard, and small cattle ranch. We bought steers in the spring and sold them in the fall. We grew and processed all our own food until I left Vernon to go to university I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was. It was a while ago. After university, I got my degree in political science at UBC, and I went into journalism. It was a passion of mine. I absolutely love having a front row seat and asking the tough questions. It truly felt like it was a public service for me to find the facts and reveal the truth and report it in a fair and balanced way. And that is still how I live my life, and it's still something that I take very seriously, and it's still something that I think is incredibly important to a successful democracy. And what I learned most of all is that no government is successful unless they follow the will of the people who elected them. Unless they did that, governments fail. After I left Global in 2016, I went to go work in the housing sector, both for-profit and non-profit, because I really wanted to understand. It was a couple years after prices started skyrocketing, and I really wanted to get an in-depth understanding of what it was like for developers, both for-profit and non-profit, to build, what the pro formas look like, what the profit margins look like. I really wanted to deeply understand that. And after that, I went to go work at the new St. Paul's Hospital project, which is due for completion in 2027. And after that, I went to go work for the BC Parks Foundation, where I work now, where our goal is to protect 30% of BC's lands and waters by 2030. I was honored to be part of the BC Conservation Fund as part of the Parks Foundation to develop that Indigenous-led conservation efforts. It's something that I am incredibly passionate about. It's something that is incredibly important. And I will leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Randy. Chris Moore.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Moore, and I'm the Conservative candidate for this constituency. And thanks for coming. And thank you, SCCA. Beautiful setup. The tables, the cookies, and the moderators. Everybody's been super welcoming, and I'm just glad to see this kind of a turnout in this hall, which takes me back to a couple of Halloween parties not too many years ago. But definitely the best parties on the Sunshine Coast have occurred in this hall, at least in my living memory. I'm a Winnipegger. I came out here in '79. I started my first company here at the Gumboot Cafe, actually. It was called Clearwater Construction Painting with a good friend of mine, Jim Budd. That didn't work out after a couple of years, and I had to relocate to Worcester for opportunities. And that was great, but I had this yearning to get back to the coast, and I moved here 2004 full-time. And since then, my wife June is with me tonight. We've managed to groom 10 grandchildren on the Sunshine Coast to date. A lot of people think of me as just a real estate developer, but I'm not. I do a lot more than that. One of my favorite things that I do is I do a cider company called Bricker Cider with my kids. They let me drive the truck, cut the grass, and babysit grandchildren. That's my job description. But with land development and real estate, one of the things I did back here in 2008 with a nonprofit called the Sunshine Coast Association with Community Living, we did one of the first affordable housing projects in downtown Seashell called Midtown, and that was 24 doors. That's functioning today. It's deals with the Sunshine Coast Association, Community Living's client base. They've got 4 or 5 units in there, and we brought that in as a very affordable alternative to the bigger townhouses and complexes in town. So that was a big shout out for doing something really cool, and we did that with the LEED standard, by the way. That was kind of neat. Through my working history, I think it's always been about partnering, whether it would be with private sector, nonprofit, or government. I had a number of businesses and things up in Worcester. I've done the same thing down here. And I suppose if I pride myself in one thing is relationship building with people and working across lines, particularly party lines. We were talking earlier that we will be working together in the future in some aspect to deal with the problems that you've addressed today. These are huge issues. I love the coast. Who doesn't want to live here? I fell in love with it heads deep in 1979. And I will do everything in my power to defend the environment of this coast and the province. In fact, even bigger than that, I'll take it to the world. #1 priority for sure. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris. Chris Ferguson.
Chris Hergesheimer, we'll just get it out of the way. Hergesheimer, or you could just call me Dr. Chris. How you doing, Roberts Creek? Come on, we can have fun in politics too. I'll use a little bit of my intro just to say how thankful that I am that you're all here, that you're all engaged, because we really do need everyone to get out and vote. Our voter turnout has been steadily declining over the last 20 years in this region, and it's time to reclaim our democratic right to vote for who we choose and who best serves the needs of this region. So, I don't even know, doctor, dad, rational optimist, musician, community worker. My mother was a kindergarten teacher, and my father was a social justice minister during the civil rights movement in Detroit. So when I tell you I come at this job with a genuine sense of a desire for justice and unity and optimism and hope, this is in me. I've done a lot of things since I've been here on the coast. I worked at Sid's Vids. I might have cut your grass. I worked for a day at Canadian Tire. Had a master's degree at the time, so they put me in aisle 8 at that time. But nevertheless, I've spent my entire working professional career mostly in the not-for-profit sector, doing community and economic development, doing income security, food security, poverty reduction work, and spending the entire time trying to bend the ear of politicians to say, this is what is going on. These are the solutions. These are the stories from people who are experiencing this. And it's at some point when you have grinded up against those symptoms of a broken system for so long, you say, at what point do I skip over that step and do I become that messenger and start to carry those issues forward? So I come at this also from a place of love of this community. My one-year-old son puked on me at the first CD Saturday after I had moved here right over there. I've been up on this stage with my band more times than I can count and have also been to a number of great parties. I know that we love the coast. I know that we have an opportunity to believe that things could be better here. And I know that playing in a system that is producing these symptoms, we cannot change the symptom by symptom. We have to change the system. And Greens are an opportunity to shake things up, to do things differently. We don't get to where we want to be from a place of fear. We only get there from a belief and a trust that things could be better. And I am willing to work for you and listen to you to make that a reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It takes us to our first question, and it has to do with DRIPA, and it's 4 parts, so it's more complicated than I would have chosen to write it, but I didn't write it. The Declaration Act confirms the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples UN Declaration as the framework for reconciliation as articulated by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and requires the provincial government to take all measures necessary to ensure the laws of British Columbia are consistent with the UN Declaration, develop and implement an action plan in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous peoples to achieve the objectives of the UN Declaration, and monitor progress through public annual reporting. The Declaration Act also enables new decision-making arrangements between the province of British Columbia and Indigenous governing bodies. Now we get to the questions. How does your party intend to uphold the positive obligation on the government of British Columbia to ensure that all laws, policy, and practices in British Columbia be brought in alignment with the UN Declaration, including creating space for shared decision-making and transforming the current legislative process to ensure substantive consultation and cooperation with Indigenous peoples? There's a second part to that. Does your party intend to repeal the Act? What does your party envision as key priorities to include in an updated Act? And how does your party intend to ensure accountability for progress on the implementation of the Declaration Act in full partnership with Indigenous peoples?
That made me tired.
Yeah, no, I think that's me too. So we're going to start with Chris Moore on this one.
Can you repeat that, please? The Conservative Party of British Columbia is committed to strategic and collaborative return of lands to the First Nations in this province. And the cornerstone of that is... And so what we found was a massive amount of, or not a massive amount, a certain number of people in the community that didn't feel they were included in the decision-making as the dock management went forward. And I'm looking at different people in the audience now that we're working towards that. But there's still a large segment of our community that feel that there was not enough inclusion in terms of as we move that forward. So I'm DRIP, absolutely, 100%. DRIPA we keep unless DRIPA gets in the way, and then we have to possibly reinterpret DRIPA. So that's where we stand with the party right now. Thanks very much.
We're gonna just feel like Chris 1 and Chris 2. It feel like a Dr. Seuss book.
Can I be Chris 1?
Yes.
You know, I appreciate the complexity of this issue, but I'm going to flip it and actually say this is simple. This is our journey. It's not an easy journey. It's uncomfortable. We don't know where we're going to be at the end of it. It makes people angry. It makes some people frustrated. It gives other people so much joy and hope. But there's no going back. This is our journey, and we are in it together. And I want you to understand that while it gets complex, and while we are in the muck, I won't leave you. No one wants to get left behind in times of disruption. A leader is supposed to stand there with you. This is not an option to go backwards. This is our collective journey in building relationships, in transforming our own understandings of relationships with the land and with other communities, with governments. And as a leader, I will be there with you while we go through this. And that's all I have to say.
DRPA was unanimously passed by the BC legislature in 2019. It wasn't a partisan issue. It wasn't a political issue. Every single person in that legislature agreed that it was a good idea and the best way to move forward. After years of Supreme Court decisions saying that First Nations in this province have never given up rights or title to their land. So instead of costly court cases, the onus should be on the people and the government to figure out a better way with the nations going forward. So the BC NDP is completely committed to DRPA. We know that when there is certainty regarding our Crown land in BC, that business feels more comfortable doing business here. We know that when First Nations steward and monitor their land, the biodiversity outcomes are higher. It's a win-win-win for all of us. So it's something that, as Chris said, people may feel uncomfortable about it, but it is something that we can do together. And there are 204 First Nations in BC, so it's not a blanket policy. Each nation and each community has to talk to each other to figure out what's best for them. One last point about the dock management plan. The Sechelt Nation and the dock owners did come together. The government asked them to do the hard work. Instead of butting heads all the time, they asked them to drop the rope and sit down and figure out the best way to protect our lands and waters in Pender Harbour. And to their credit, they did. And they signed the dock management plan. Dock owners get to keep their docks, and the Sechelt Nation and the dock owners and our community of Pender Harbour can work on what's important, and that's restoring the biodiversity in our area. Thank you.
Ways of making life more affordable and reducing climate pollution. If your party is elected to form the next government, how would you support green public transportation across the province that is accessible, safe, efficient, and affordable, including a BC-wide interregional bus service, as they do in Ontario and in Washington State? And for here, we're going to start with Chris Hergesheimer.
Well, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to make a little plug for the BC Greens platform that just dropped a couple of days ago. It is just the most inspiring, forward-thinking, progressive document that we have seen come out of a political party in the last little while. It is really a joy. You might want to sit down on a Sunday afternoon and have a read, but one of the cornerstones of that policy is public transit, and we're going fast, free, and frequent. Right now on the Sunshine Coast, transportation deserts and lack of transportation options are contributing to people's inability to feel connected. Transportation is more than just moving from place to place. It is about what knits a community together. It's about how you find belonging and inclusion. And for those of you who don't know, back in May, I drove my car up to Egmont. I parked my car at Skookumchuck, and I started walking to where the next public transit station was. And I walked for 10 hours. I walked for 51 kilometers along the Sunshine Coast Highway to the north end of Red Roofs, where 30 years ago, I could bus from Vancouver to the north end of Red Roofs. And so for 30 years, the bus has gone no farther. And it's time we make investments in public transit for the benefit of resilient communities and for the options. We're talking about affordability, and it's costing between $9,000 and $14,000 a year to operate one vehicle versus $1,000. This is a way to build resilient communities, tackle climate mitigation, and put money back in people's pockets. This is a no-brainer. Public transit, double down now.
Randy Neal.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, public transit, we used to have public transit on the Sunshine Coast that went from Lund all the way into Vancouver. That was when our buses carried freight. And so that disappeared when FedEx and all these other companies started popping up and commuters just got lost by the wayside. So yeah, if you're needing a medical appointment in Vancouver and you live in Pender Harbor or Powell River, you need a vehicle. If you're getting eye surgery, you can't drive. So we need to get a bus service that is dependable, especially for people who need to get to medical appointments. There is a pilot project on Vancouver Island right now. It's called Health Connect, and it does exactly that. It also works in the Vancouver Coastal Health Region up north of Prince George as well. And if you have an appointment in Vancouver, whether you live in Lund or Langdale, the bus will come and pick you up free of charge and take you to your appointment. If there are extra seats on that bus, other people can hop on, and it goes on a daily basis, so there's some regularity there. That is a first step that I think that we deserve here on the Sunshine Coast, because there's too many people. More than half of our population here are seniors, so we need to be able to get some sort of dependable service so people can get to their appointments. Another big thing I think, as well as public transit, is active transportation. This is something that we need to work on as well. We need to widen our shoulders to get people riding their bikes again or in their active scooters or whatever they need to do. I think this is a focus, a huge focus, I know, for a lot of people track here on the Lower Coast as well as the Upper Coast, and I've been having a lot of conversations with people about that. So I think that's a big focus that we need to work on here as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Moore.
Yes, just last week in Powell River, one of those conversations with a group of seniors and one particular lady who was not driving any further. She couldn't drive, and anyway, she was lamenting the time when we did have the Malaspina line. I think that's what it was called back many years ago, when you could load up at Powell River, as Randine just mentioned, and for freight, we used to pick up down at Rain City in Seashelt. My kids used to take it a lot when they used to go to Vancouver or back and forth. We need to get that happening again for sure. I mean, there's no question that connectivity, it's not just this constituency, it's right across the province. If you go up north with the loss of Greyhound and etc., it's not acceptable. And of course, the people that are paying the piper on this one are the people in the rural communities that just do not have the urban transit options that the urban centers have. But you know, and on another note, there is we stand, and I want to see the realignment and readjustment of this highway. It becomes even more important for me the more I've been driving out of Powell River, particularly late at night, coming off that ferry off of into Earl's Cove at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. Anytime during the year is brutal. In the winter, it's awful. I'd hate to have to make an emergency run to the hospital or to get to Vancouver at 10:30 in November when it's raining. The highway is not acceptable in many areas. We can all agree to that. The biking is terrible. There's no shoulders, and it's just a huge safety issue. So I'm committed to getting that done, and on top of that, the handy dart service. I really like that stuff, getting to the seniors and helping them get into their clinics and stuff like that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Climate crisis. Do you support the requirement that all new buildings should be all electric instead of hooking up with fossil gas? There's no evidence this makes buildings any more expensive. If you do support this, what will your party do to make it happen? And we're going to start with Randine this time.
Thank you for your question. There's no need, we know that there's a desperate need for housing on the Sunshine Coast.
we also need to make sure that we have the infrastructure to be able to support that housing, but most importantly, we need to make sure that we can attract young families here who have good jobs so they can raise their children and stay here and put their kids in school and not have to leave like it happens to so many nurses or EAs or paramedics that they just can't support the cost of living here or the cost of renting or purchasing a home. So yes, I'm completely in agreement that we can work making all of our new homes fossil fuel free. I think natural gas only goes up to Half Moon Bay, so all of the homes that are north of that are fueled by electricity. We just got a heat pump last year. There are rebates for solar panels that the government is offering, and we're doubling down on all of those initiatives to try to make all of those homes as clean and as low footprint as possible. Thank you.
Chris Moore.
No, I don't support it. I've been in the industry a long time. I think what's on the horizon, the Step 5, people are familiar with that maybe. I mean, just on average right now, when I talk to the builders on the Sunshine Coast, that will introduce approximately $35,000 to $50,000 a door for new housing at a time when housing is right through the roof to begin with. There are other solutions that we can look at. Going to the full hydro, electricity produced through hydro is not the way. We don't have the hydro capacity, number one, to put all these heat pumps in. And I think there's alternatives with it, even with the natural gas. I mean, a good example of this was they were talking about converting all the restaurants in Vancouver into electrical power instead of the gas power for the cooking. It was at an average cost, if you can believe it, at $800,000 a restaurant for all the restaurants in Vancouver. And you can imagine what that meant to all the owners. It's a great idea, and I think we can work to that, where we can slowly wean ourselves off fossil fuels. But it's not a quick thing that you can just do overnight, unless you really want to jump the prices of housing. Our whole thing on housing right now is how do we get the pricing down so that we can keep our the whole affordable levels at whatever level you want to call affordable, whether it be shelter, whether it be supportive housing, transition housing, or single-family homes. But we need to drill the cost down of that, and we can certainly do it without making everything dependent on electricity. Thanks.
Continuity. So is it going to happen overnight? Absolutely not. No one's suggesting it happen overnight, but this can be part of an optimistic, joyful, creative transition. And when we say we don't have the electricity to do this, we would if we would stop giving it at discounted rates to LNG plants, but that's for another time, you know. So when we come back to that, I don't think we can talk about what are we doing at the symptomatic level once again. Why don't we talk about the embedded energy that goes into our buildings? We have regulatory structures and friction that allow certain kinds of buildings to be built and other kinds of buildings not to be built, and expending huge amounts of money on brand new builds with no reclaimed materials seems to be our only way to go. And there are other options. Anything is possible. We're not moving around looking for votes at what's playing well in the political realm, and we can get there with our creativity. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Fourth question. In 2020, the BC government released the Old Growth Strategic Review, which outlines 14 recommendations for the protection and better stewardship of old growth
industry in this part of the coast. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Chris Hergesheimer.
I haven't read that plan yet, but we come from a party that says trust the science. And the science is bulletproof right now that if we don't take immediate action around the protection of our forests, we are going to lose vast amounts of biodiversity. And this is going to cost us in so many ways. So if you don't want to admit that this is a climate issue and a biodiversity issue, let's talk about it as an economic issue. Because those costs are going to mount up year over year over year. And so if the policy is no more old growth logging, that's the policy, full stop. No more old growth logging. Greens are committed to moratoriums on that. Greens are committed to making sure that the wealth of this province that is happening in industry is not being sucked out to multinational corporations and not benefiting the people of the regions where these industries are supposed to be located. The wealth used to flow here. The reality is that story doesn't track anymore. We can forge a new way forward if we're willing to tell ourselves a new story. That the wealth of a forest lies in the intact forest, in the biodiversity, in the economic safety and security that it gives us, in the relationships, in the biomes, in the water, and our relationship to the land. So when we talk about no more old growth logging, there's no more old growth logging. We're not cutting down trees to make pellets. Let's cut down what we need in new, sustainable ways, and certainly let's disband the people who are out there arresting land defenders, who are standing on the front lines to make sure that these old forests are not lost forever. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Randy.
The BC NDP is absolutely committed and just renewed its commitment to enact, to follow all 14 recommendations from the Old Growth Strategic Review. As part of the conservation fund that I participated in to protect 30% of BC by 2030, Gary Merkel was on that committee, and Gary Merkel is one of the authors of the Old Growth Strategic Review. And we would have a lot of long conversations about this. And one of the things that he always said is the 14 recommendations that he made are not easy. And so he knows that it's going to take time. And that's what the government is doing. We are enacting all of those. The first 4 recommendations have to do with public engagement and public understanding. So we can create a paradigm shift so we all understand as a province that our earth is worth more whole than it is extracted from. And so once we have that paradigm shift within government to change the processes, to understand that forestry and timber isn't our first priority, but our first priority is also the biodiversity and the watershed safety of our forests. That's number 1. And then number 2, we have to do a public shift in thinking. So we are getting there. We are fully committed to following all 14 and enacting all 14 recommendations from the Old Growth Forest Strategic Review. And we are also protecting a lot of old growth forests. Just in the summer, we announced the protection of Clayoquot Sound. That was a deferral before. Now we're announcing the permanent protection of it. Over 200,000 hectares in Treaty 8 territory as well. And there's many more of those protections coming up. So we just have to keep working, but we are absolutely committed to doing that. Thank you.
These 3 are doing great, and I should point out that none of them has seen any of these questions in advance. So this is all off the top of the head, and that's to the credit of all 3 of them. This is question number 5. This is a question about the climate, fracking, and LNG. If you are elected, will you oppose the approval of new LNG facilities and the associated pipelines? Do you think approval should be rescinded for any of the LNG terminals that have not yet been built? Tilbury LNG Phase 2, Woodbury LNG, Cedar LNG, and Prince George. And we're going to start with Chris Hergesheimer.
Can you guess where I stand on this one? This is a participatory part. No more LNG. No more LNG licenses. Are we going to go around and shut down everyone, all this industry that's happening? Absolutely not. But you do not go investing money in times of a climate crisis, in times where you need to make a transition into infrastructure that's going to take 20 or 30 years to play out. And of course, we're going to talk about, well, we need to sell this LNG. They've just released a new study that shows that the value of this is going to begin to plummet at the end of this decade, and we cannot compete with other places that are going to be selling it for a lot less than us. So if we are banking on this, that we need to be exporting, taking from the earth and selling it as our only story, we need to make a change. $2 billion a year worth of subsidies. These oil and gas companies are making $35 billion a year in profit, and we know that they are the main contributor to climate change and extreme weather events, which cost $17 billion in 2021. We're paying them 3 times. It's time to stop that while our hospitals and our schools and our social services sectors are constantly underfunded and under-resourced while we're paying them 3 times. It's time to put an end to it and tell ourselves a different story. These sunset industries built wealth and they made history and they made us feel good. But that is not and cannot be the story of our future. I believe that, and I know you believe that.
Yeah!
This is a hard one for me because I am a deep environmentalist at heart. So my job, if I am MLA, is to really push to understand that, to Chris's point, I think the value of LNG will drop. But we are here right now, and the BC NDP is absolutely committed to doing our best to fight climate change. So what we have done to ensure that we can reach our targets is 4 specific things. We are bringing in an emission cap for all oil and gas industry. We are requiring all proposed LNG facilities to pass an emissions test with a plan to be net zero by 2030. We are creating clean energy and major projects to fast-track investment in clean energy and technology, and we are ramping up renewals, particularly wind and solar. And we're offering rebates on heat pumps and solar as well to get people investing in renewable energies. And we've eliminated, most importantly, the largest fuel subsidy in BC, the Deep Well Royalty Credit, and we brought in new regulations to slash methane emissions. We understand that climate change is real and we are moving in the right direction. We are going to reduce emissions 40% by 2030, 60% by 2040, etc. We are committed to this. Thank you.
Basic chemistry tells you that fracking produces about 50% fewer greenhouse emissions than coal burning. Well, I mean, and we all know how many coal plants are over in Asia right now. There's 1,200 of them. Germany's actually fired up their coal firing right now. So, I mean, we can talk about the same. It's the same kind of equation as going to all houses should be on electricity produced by hydro as opposed to electricity produced by natural gas. It's just not possible. We have 3.5 billion people on this planet that rely on coal. We have the greatest industries, China and India, using coal for all their energy sources. They are, and they're making steps in other areas, but they're burning coal like you can't believe it. 1,200 plants, there's only 1,000 plants in the rest of the world. China's got 1,200 of them. China wants gas. If you don't think fracking or gas is a lot less polluting to the biosphere than burning coal, then we should all go back and take grade 10 chemistry again, because it's very clear. You don't burn coal. We produce coal in this country, we still sell it. It comes out of the ports in Vancouver. Alberta and BC mine coal and send it overseas. Korea, Japan, China, those are our 3 customers. We do that every day. Gas is way less in terms of emissions, and it's a step towards the green future. Thank you.
Jeff. It's not
This is not a question. This is a Honda Civic is parked in the fire department parking lot, about to be towed. So if you have a Honda Civic that you don't want towed, lift your backside and move it.
As MLA, I would.
Well, it's always good to be, this is improv comedy. You see, that's how it works. You pick up a line. Okay, question number 6. Last year, the BC government released a draft biodiversity.
The government is fully protected to that. Working with First Nations in Indigenous-led stewardship projects to help them come up with ways like guardian programs to help steward and manage their own lands. And I think this is, I really feel like with the dock management plan that the Sunshine Coast can be almost a template for how to do it right. I think that we should have our own plan to protect at least 30% of the Sunshine Coast by 2030, or maybe 40% by 2040. I believe that we are such a community of builders and environmentalists that we can, leverage what we already know and what we already believe in to protect our biodiversity and increase our biodiversity. So that's what I would love to see do. And yes, our government is absolutely committed. Thanks.
Chris Moore.
Yes, we are committed to a biodiversity plan, and I think I would take it a step further. What's one of the things that I think the Sunshine Coast up and down could be a world leader in? We should be a place of learning here. We have all the elements between the waters, the mountains, and the forest, temperate forest, and just the whole ecosystem is fantastic. And it should be a place of higher learning. The biodiversity plan for us would be local decision making. I mean, the 5 elements: effective use of resources, partnership with First Nation, of course, is a critical component. And then the environmental stewardship has to be balanced with economic development. I mean, all you have to do is go up and spend an afternoon in Powell River or in other rural areas in this province to talk about the people and how they make a livelihood. And a lot of the stuff that comes out of the ground is how they make it, resource extraction. So this has always been a challenge, but it's also a great opportunity in how we can do things really, really good, way better than the rest of the world. And trust me, for those that have traveled, especially in different areas, we do an extremely good job. Not perfect, but we're working in the right direction. And then on top of that, we need high levels of accountability and transparency on stuff. So we support initiatives like that, and we want to work forward with it, and I think we should lead. Thanks very much.
Was the question about a biodiversity law? Yes, 100%. You don't need to be a scientist to understand that biodiversity is about relationships. At its very simple level, it's about relationships. And how arrogant of us to feel that our relationships, our relationship to one another as humans, our relationship to an economic system, and our relationships to corporate interests or business ought to be more valuable than those relationships that are out there. How arrogant of us. How do we move forward together? We need to understand that we are in relationship with that biodiversity and it with us. We need to be talking about how an economy and how society and how human relationships fit in to the dominant number of relationships which exist in the natural world. So when we are talking about a law or talking about it, we need to do more than talk about it. We need to build our communities in such a way that protects that. And if anyone tells you that we can get there without making sacrifices, they are lying. We all need to sacrifice for the future that could be amazing. I truly believe that. But there are small sacrifices that we need to make. And we can protect everything that's around us. And we can strengthen our own relationships, reimagine the way we do business and culture and society in that framework, and be healthier, be happier, be more optimistic about what the future holds. I believe in us. Do you believe in us? Yeah!
So, question? The question. Question 7. This is a question about the climate crisis. In 2023, BC paid $1.1 billion to fight climate change-driven forest fires. A single extreme weather event in 2022, the storm damaging the seawalk in Vancouver, is costing $800,000. Do you support legally seeking compensation for a fair share of the harm caused by the fossil fuel industry by suing Big Oil as California, New Jersey, and other U.S. states are presently doing? If not, what is your solution to prevent taxpayers from bearing all of the costs of climate change? And we start this one with Chris Hergesheimer.
We'll get it by the end, Jeff. We'll get it by the end. Believe in us. Maybe not. Maybe not. No, I'm optimistic. I've got faith in us. Think about those numbers. It's staggering what this is costing us. Think about those numbers while we get out the spreadsheet about whether we can come up with $600 million to put public transit that's free across this province. Or whether we can come up with $700 million to make sure that every kid at school has access to a laptop and a lunch program. And then we're literally throwing money away. And we're writing it off as the cost of doing business in a climate crisis. At some point, we need to ask ourselves, when does it stop? And when do we make the people who are responsible for this, primarily responsible for this, pay? So should we sue Big Oil? Absolutely. Does that mean that once we filed that lawsuit, we get to sit back and say, well, look at us and pat ourselves on our back, look what we did? That is one tool in a toolbox that we need to have every available tool out right now to solve this. Let's go after them. Let's take action in our communities. Let's look at legislation. Let's stop subsidizing this so we don't have to pay for it 3 times. Let's bring local control of industry back to our communities where we can make decisions about how it happens. And for the love of all that is sacred in this earth, let's stop sending raw products out of this in the hope that that's the only way that we move forward economically. All this contribution to it requires a multi-stakeholder strategic effort. Sue Big Oil, yes. But does that mean we get off the hook for direct action, for being activists in our community and advocates for what we know is right and we know is better? And the answer is no. So let's get on it with every tool we've got.
Thank you, Danny.
I feel like I have to ramp up a little bit after that. Let's go! You know, every year the Earth hits another record high. 619 people died in the heat dome of 2021. The atmospheric rivers decimated the breadbasket of the Fraser Valley and cut Vancouver off from the rest of the country effectively. Last year, climate change wiped out almost all the stone fruit crops in the Okanagan and almost the entire grape industry. This is all caused by climate change, all of it. And it's going to get worse, and it's going to get more expensive, and it's going to affect, obviously, our food prices. It's going to affect our healthcare costs, and it already is, and those costs are going to keep going up. So BC has always been a leader in suing big tobacco, for example. It was the BC government was the first in Canada to sue tobacco. We just filed a proposed national class action in the Supreme Court against forever chemicals. Those are chemicals that never go away and are present in our drinking water. So our job as government is to protect the integrity of our natural resources and hold bad actors accountable. So yes, we'd certainly be open to suing Big Oil. Thanks.
And Chris Moore.
Yeah, just the easy part of the question for me is I'm not interested in suing Big Oil, but I am interested in how we mitigate the fire season. I did 19 years of firefighting at Whistler. I fought fires in Manitoba a long time ago. When I travel the province, it is precipitated by climate change for sure, but I mean, of the fires that were started 2 years ago, I think 25 to 30% were caused by human negligence. And we don't step on that very hard in this province. I think the highest fine for starting a forest fire in this province last year was $2,200. Nova Scotia just changed that to $25,000. The other thing we can do is BC Wildfire Services need to be really ramped up. The budgeting last year was only $150 million. I mean, it probably spent $700, it was $1 billion before that. This is upon us, and a lot of it is attributed to our forest management, or lack thereof, over the last 50 years. You can talk to most people. We have not done a good job in terms of cleaning the bushes up. There is ways that we can mitigate this, but one of the things I do like is BC Wildfire Services, and I was talking to firefighters yesterday about this, that we want to create BC Fire Services to be at the same professional level that you would think of an urban firefighter. So we're not looking for high school students or university students or part-timers. We're looking for full-time people that will be committed to this fire service as a career. We would also give them the equipment. How we would pay for that is that we would hire these people out when they're not fighting fires here to go down to the States or Australia, or to be a worldwide force. We should lead in this. We've led in the forestry industry for many, many years. This is part of that now. We should lead in this. And I think it's a great idea. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, question number 8. Would your government enact a new mineral tenure law that is consistent with the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples as soon as possible? How would you ensure the public plays a meaningful role in the process of reforming BC's mining laws? And we're going to start with Randy.
Okay, I have to be completely honest. I don't know. I have to research more into this. Can you actually repeat the question, Jeff?
Mining industry. So yeah.
This is your question.
No, it's not. Actually. Mine would have been much longer. Would your government enact a new mineral tenure law that is consistent with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as soon as possible? How would you ensure the public plays a meaningful role in the process of reforming BC's mining laws?
Okay, so again, because BC unanimously passed DRIPA in 2019, every decision we make going forward on Crown land, we have to work with First Nations because they never gave up rights or title to that land. That is something the BC NDP has absolutely committed to. I think that we have, and I may be wrong, so we'll have to double check. I think there's 14 mine proposals out there right now, a lot of them in northern BC, all of them with the full participation of First Nations, or potentially even First Nations led in some cases. So yes, all of the tenures that are issued have to have the full prior consultation and collaboration and partnership with First Nations. And I was confused because I think the government has already agreed to do that under DRIPA. So yes, thank you.
Well, I'm on the same page. I'm not familiar with it, but we do support mining, mining in tandem and collaboration with First Nation, that's for sure. I think we're seeing that now with some of the LNG plants, wood fiber, and up at Kitimat. I know that there's a lot of excitement with First Nation groups up there in terms of what's happening. The sad story, though, with mining, just for people's general knowledge, mining is a resource extraction, and we can do it well. We don't have to be like the old days. I mean, it can be done well, and we can remediate a lot of the land. But the deal is for a lot of the rural communities, it's what makes the community function. Without the mine, they don't function. The average salary for a miner in the province right now is $142,000 a year for a small community. So pick your community. It's a life-saving thing. Without the mine or the resource extraction, there's no community. It doesn't exist. You can tandem that with the worldwide demand and pick your mineral, nickel, copper, it doesn't matter. There's a massive demand. I mean, and we haven't even seen a third of the world wake up to the reality of wanting everything that we have in this room right now. the average energy consumption for most of the people in Africa, if you can imagine, is equivalent to what your grandparents used in 1840. That's what they use today. They want what we want. How do we deliver that is going to be the challenge, because they have the right to ask for it. This is a huge challenge for us. We can do it right, and we should be world leaders.
Yes. This is going to sound like old hat again, but when I hear the story that we need this, we need these few jobs. They are few in the whole scheme of things. And these mines are not enriching communities in the same way they used to. We have to break out of this story. And relationships. Let's make sure every one of these mines is managed with Indigenous communities so that they can benefit from it, who have historically been marginalized in this province. Let's tell ourselves a new story. And also, when we talk about mining, we need to understand that these are huge, huge businesses that ought to be leaving the land in a better shape when they leave. We had the biggest disaster in our province with the Mount Holly mine. You know, and people are writing off the fines of polluting water and polluting communities into their ledger books for infractions with no consequences beyond that. We need to ask ourselves about any other industry that has evolved so much, and yet here we are scraping things out of the earth in a very, very destructive way and telling ourselves that there's no alternative. The most dangerous phrase in the language is, we have always done it this way. When do we change? 4 years from now? 8 years from now? When? When do we say that the system needs an overhaul? When do we stop measuring wealth by gross domestic product and start measuring it by the health and well-being of our communities and this planet? When? Now!
A completely related aside, Mark Twain was once asked his opinion on mining. He said, "Oh hell, man, that's easy. A mine's nothing more with a hole in the ground with a liar on top." Question number 9. Young people want action to tackle the climate crisis and to create more affordable housing. Do you think these two goals conflict with each other, or are they complementary? And we're going to start with Chris Moore.
So affordability and climate challenges for young people.
Tackle the climate crisis and affordable housing.
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, that offers a great opportunity. How do we provide affordable housing for young people as they move into their middle age and stuff like that without destroying everything around us? And we had a lot of really cool stuff. I remember going back to when I graduated out of Red River Community College in building technology, built passive solar energy. That was back in the mid-70s. And that stuff is as relevant today as it was then. I mean, we can learn. I mean, I remember the Adobe hut from New Mexico. No mechanical component attached to it at all, but heated during the day, radiate warmth at night, cooled at night, radiate coolness during the day. It was a brilliant design. It doesn't cost a lot. Mud and Adobe, but those principles are out there. And I think what we've done in the housing industry, we've made it super complex. We have a multitude of different consultants that are involved in building a basic 1,200 square foot house that really is not that complicated. And you can certainly get it certified real quick. There's a lot of really good builders around. When I look at a house that was built in 83 or 93 compared to 2024, the only difference is the $1 million in front of the one today is compared to the one in 93. And my question is why? We've over-regulated to such a level that it's almost impossible to come out of the dirt. There's other jurisdictions in this country. All you got to do is go to Alberta to determine the same house in Alberta is maybe $300,000 less. Why is real estate, particularly housing, so outrageously expensive in British Columbia? And that is the challenge. Thanks.
The question was about young people and their concerns with climate. Where are the young people? Honestly, what do the young people want? What can we do for the young people? Let's get the young people in the room and ask them what they want and really listen to them. We're doing this top-down thing always in government. In MLA is supposed to be community politics about what our needs are. So where are the young people? And I'll tell you what, I got a kid who's 16 and one who's 18, and I'll tell you what they don't respond to is doom and fear and gloom. They want hope. They want options. Hey, I'm gonna buy a tiny home. Oh, you can't put it anywhere. Hey, I wanna build a house out of mud. Oh, no, you can't do that. Friction everywhere while we're talking about affordability and creating options for young people. 87% of our housing stock on the Sunshine Coast is single-family homes, and the largest demand is for bachelors and one-bedrooms. We gotta look at the flow chart here and the axis and say, we're getting the wrong kind of houses to meet our needs. We can fix that. This is not the inevitable outcome. The financialization of the housing market is a huge contributor to affordability, and when we build these resilient pocket neighborhoods that are walkable, where young people are riding their bikes, and there's elders sitting on their stoop, and there's people with complex mental health challenges living in there, that is climate action and it is community action. This is a double benefit for us. So we have to understand the mismatch between the friction and the problem. Let's get after some real, actionable solutions by getting rid of the friction in the interest of affordability, not profit.
Thank you.
The BC NDP has real tangible solutions. Since the federal money for housing disappeared in the 1990s, the country has been struggling with how to keep up with costs for affordable and deeply affordable housing, and the BC NDP's platform on housing is probably the most innovative that I've ever seen anywhere across the country. So we are committed to building 300,000 purpose-built rentals. These are for our middle class or workforce housing, so for our EAs, our nurses, our paramedics. We've changed and gotten rid of the red tape in zoning regulations, which has upset Donna McMahon. Sorry, Donna. But it's going to allow us to be able to turn a single family home into a triplex or a fourplex. So our kids, although they never want to live with us until they're 30, will have a one bedroom or a basement suite to rent that is affordable to them. And we're bringing in factory homes. We've got 10 great businesses across the province that are building factory homes. The government has also released templates and architectural drawings for free for duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. And factory homes greatly reduce the cost of emissions and the cost of waste and the final cost of a home. What the Shishel Nation is doing is also absolutely extraordinary. They are barging over homes that developers are tearing down in Vancouver and building on just off Hades Road, I think. And this is going to provide, I think in phase 1, 30 homes. Phase 2 has just been approved. That's going to be another 30 homes. So we're saving, we're reusing, and we're recycling homes that would otherwise be destroyed and repurposing in them into multifamily homes for the Shishel. And it's something that we can do throughout the Sunshine Coast. Thank you.
In more value-added resource use at a local level. Examples given in wood, mass timber building manufacturing, and to make it easy for the three of you, UBC and BC has been building up to 10 stories out of mass timber now. Furniture making, guitar tops, we grow some of the finest guitar tops in the world. It doesn't take a lot of wood, but they sure sell for a lot of money. So those are the examples. Value added with local resources. Oh, and we start with Chris Moore.
Well, the value added, one of the things I like to not that many years ago was when you harvest trees from a certain area, you had to produce secondary value added to the wood that was harvested from that area. We've lost that system, and that's pretty much what started the problems a long time ago. I certainly know that Powell River would be really interested in getting some mills back into their area to produce whatever, guitars, timber, etc. So that is something that I would like to see happening. That's always kind of bamboozled me in terms of my building career down here, that we didn't have a kiln, for instance, on the Sunshine Coast. That said, the pavilion I built in our yard and the buildings that we put onto the house periodically, like decks and stuff, are harvested from trees in my area that we mill ourselves. And that's really gratifying to do that. There's something about taking a fir down and then repurposing that fir into beamwork or tables or whatever. One of the dinners will have a wet noodle, if you can imagine, where if the building's more conventional, like a 6, 8, 9-story concrete structure or a steel structure, it'll fracture, it'll break. So I think we can become world leaders. There's a good mill over in Port Alberni right now dealing with these composites, and they are composite wood fiber. Typically they have metal fixturing at the end, so a beam and a post would be joined with medical couplings, and they are world leading, and this is a great product and a huge future for the province. Thank you.
Chris Ferguson.
Thanks. I want to thank Chris for raising that, because that is exactly what I'm talking about. They say there's enough concrete poured on this planet to cover the entire planet with 8 inches of concrete. Okay? This is one of the most enormous, valuable things that we have produced, but that's an old story, the story of concrete. That's the kind of story I'm talking about. Mass timber, composite materials, alternative materials. Look around. Everything that you touch, everything that you interact with is a product from the earth, but it's a product of human ingenuity and creativity. What's more fulfilling? To go and chop down a tree and put it on a truck and never see it again and get a little bit of wealth for it? Or is it to take it and turn it into something? That's where the creativity comes from. That's what inspires people. That's what the resource industry was built on. And that's what the new alternative green economy will be fully driven by. That desire for ingenuity, that creativity, and not to mention the trillions of dollars that can be made in this economy while also being climate friendly. So I don't want to say we're driven by money, but that's an added benefit. We are driven by ingenuity, and when I hear about that and when I read about that, that gives me hope. That gives me inspiration. And so where are the subsidies and the investments for that? Why are these things not moving quickly so that we can see that story in front of us and say, let's do this again and again and again and again, and let's be a leader. Let's take our creativity back and make stuff more than a hole in the ground or a cut down tree or fresh water blasted into a fracking mine. Thank you.
The BC NDP is also working really hard in this as well. We know that the pulp mill here is, I think, now the oldest in the province, because a lot of them are shutting down quickly because we're cutting fewer trees, we're putting biodiversity over resource extraction, and that's a good thing. But the trees that we do have, we can do more with. We can do more with creating a forced value fund that fast tracks wood manufacturing facilities and the retooling of mills as well, to not just shut them down, but to process second and third growth timber to get more jobs per tree by tying our forest resources to mills that employ BC workers and also accelerate the growth of engineered wood production. We've also put a massive amount in a fund to help retrain forestry workers who are out of a job, to get them into clean tech energy. I was listening to a radio program the other day on CBC about blasting and drilling. And the interviewer was saying, well, was this for the oil sands? And they said, no, we're increasing the number of classes for kids because of geothermal, because we cannot hire enough drillers and blasters to help us in our geothermal industry. So we just doubled the number of skilled trades training for workers, because we really need to be able to not just retrain people, but also keep people in some of those traditional industries that are still important to our province, but do it in a way that we get more value per tree. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going along we're making good time, actually. Question 11. The province controls land use on local watersheds, including logging and mining. Local governments are responsible for providing potable water without the ability to protect the water source. How would your party resolve this conflict of resource extraction versus clean water? And we will start with Randy.
I'm just going to question again, thank you. Okay, perfect. The province controls land use on local watersheds, including logging and mining. Local governments are responsible for providing potable water with the ability to protect the water source. How would you try to resolve this conflict of resource extraction versus clean water? Okay.
That's not part of it.
Yeah, that's not part of it, sorry. This is, I don't see it as much as a conflict as it is an opportunity. Chapman Water, for example, there was a fight to make sure that that was protected as a Class A park to protect those water systems, and that's what happened. So forestry, tenures, selective logging, all of those things, we need to ensure that our watershed is protected first and foremost. I've driven up to Day Road to see where they're repairing all the bridges that washed out during the atmospheric rivers. I think 3 or 4 areas that they're rebuilding. So that's incredibly important. I signed the Watershed Security Pledge this morning, so it's incredibly important to me to ensure that we protect our watersheds, we look after our watersheds, and it's part of a management plan that is both local governments and provincial governments, so we work together in a sustainable way so we can count on our watersheds for generations and generations to come. Thank you.
First and foremost, no logging in watersheds, full stop. And we need to look at that big time. And working with community forest over the years was really interesting, especially when they brought in the LiDAR stuff. I remember when I was on council 2011 to 14 and they did their first presentation. It was incredibly informative as a layman, not really knowing much about it, but in terms of bringing this radar searching stuff, if people are familiar with it, and this kind of gives you the contours up to approximately a foot, which is a lot different than sending a surveyor out to shoot the contours and determine exactly how the watersheds work. And it kind of really, with that technology, kind of really realigned where the watersheds were and the areas that we wanted to protect and the ones that maybe were we could look at in terms of logging. So I thought that that was really good, and will go a long ways in terms of protecting the watershed, and I think I've certainly signed that pledge, and I think everybody else has. In terms of the potable water issue, I mean, that's a big one right now. I mean, particularly for Seashell, less so for Powell River at this particular point. There's exploring a bunch of alternatives right now. They're exploring artesian well systems all through the West Seashell area. With some drills, and we have the First Nation, Seashell Nation, looking at their reservoir systems in just south of the mine site in Seashell. So they're doing the preliminary work on that in terms of establishing a water reserve system that would come off of the overflow from Chapman, I guess. But yeah. It's a big one, but I think we can do it. I think we don't have to compromise anything at this point, but we need to step on the water big time. Thanks.
Look at this book. Who has this book? What does it say? People's water. The people's water. 3 words. water stewardship councils. Okay, that is at the core of BC Green's work to get control and relationships back into local communities. And let it be known on the record here, October 6th, this is our most valuable resource that we have. And it's only going to become more valuable. And if we are letting people pollute the water and we are not making the investments that we need, we are going to pay the price many times over. Sometimes I like to come into my place of privilege and say, for $600 a year, I get potable water piped into my home from a mountain lake. That's amazing. And we complain when it's $694 or $712 or $800 when we should be saying, how amazing, how lucky, we need to protect this at all costs. I've been traveling up and down this riding. We've got a water management problem here. Up in Powell River, they've got 3,000 or 4,000 people who are on small water utilities that are aging and the infrastructure is crumbling and their water bill is $3,500 in some communities because they can't get the loans and grants needed to pay for this. And then on Texada Island, they're on a boil water advisory. Water unites us. If there's one thing that shouldn't be partisan, it's like, let's get this sorted. Let's protect this together and move forward with an idea that we can have clean water for generations to come. And that means choices about what we use it on. And industry ought not be the dominant one. Thank you.
Thank you. Question number 12. What plan do you have to deal with a large forest fire on the Sunshine Coast? And we'll start with Chris Moore. What plan do you have? Presumably That's your plan to deal with a forest fire?
I did fire at Whistler. I was a captain there for 20 years, and I did some forest firefighting up in Manitoba when I was younger. So I've been at the front line, and I can testify that the threat is unbelievable when you get close to radiant heat like that. I think one of the great things that's happening on the coast right now is the Fire Smart program. I don't know how many people have taken it. Actually, I think Jim was here. I had my first course here with the Fire Smart program. And I advocate that to anybody that is in interface, got that host with the trees around it. Some of the real interesting stuff is like, do not have juniper berries around your house. They explode and they turn into little gas balls. Don't have bark mulch around your garden. That's just kind of like a wick. The fire gets started in the woods, it'll come across the ground, and then all of a sudden, it's got your cedar siding going. So metal roofs, eaves troughs, metal hardy plank, sorry, but it is concrete, will go a long ways in protecting the dwellings that you're in, kind of thing, right? And it's amazing what you can do with that a little bit of prevention. You won't get it all done in 1 year, but if you pick at it over maybe 2 or 3 years, if you are in that kind of a environment, it's amazing what you can get done. And it'll go a long ways in terms of saving your house if, in the event, we have a fire. Which we probably will have at some time, because we don't have to go far in the woods right now to see where the big fires were 100 years ago. We did have them through here. I've got some big stumps in my yard that are probably 4 times the size of me, and they were, I would say, several hundred years ago. So it's not a question of if we're going to have it. We are going to have it. Prepare for it best we can with our fire services. We can talk about the highway later, but Fire Smart is probably your first big step. Thanks.
Chris Ferguson.
I know a few things, but I don't know much about fires. But I do know that in 2015, when we had that fire, that scared me. That hit. That really scared me. Because I thought about what that means for our community and for the future. And so yes, Fire Smart and making sure we have solid evacuation plans, which we do at the regional district, and people who have done great work for extreme weather and emergency situations. But part of how we respond to a potential disaster, whether it's floods or fire, has to do with our social networks and our connections, which are becoming less and less as we become antagonistic and polarized and isolated. So how do we prepare for a natural disaster when we don't know our neighbors? When we're not making effort to build resiliency and opportunities within our community to find the assets and the resources that we have in our communities to look out for one another. So I don't know what can be done. I'm not an expert. I don't know what kind of forest management practices keep fires down. I understand the value of Fire Smart. And I don't want to see yahoos lighting fires up the logging roads. But sometimes fires happen. And when they happen, we need to be able to rely on each other. We need to trust government. We need to trust the processes, and we need to make sure that our connections and our resilience as a community and a region are strong. Because that's how we respond, and that's how we make it through a scary experience to the other side.
I was still a reporter at Global TV in 2015 when the forest fire broke out in Sea Shelton. I remember I came, 60-year-old Joe Fair from Roberts Creek was killed in that fire, and it was absolutely devastating for the entire community and for the entire Sunshine Coast. And that's what it's like now everywhere, every summer. We see a plume of smoke at the end of August, and everyone is just on tenterhooks, and we're worried about whether the crews are going to respond quickly enough to put it out before it spreads. This is something that we have to deal with now because of climate change, year after year, summer after summer after summer. Fire Smart is an amazing program. Gambier is doing some amazing work in terms of that because they don't have a fire department. They only have each other if fire breaks out on Gambier. So they're working really hard to make sure they stay safe should a fire break out. Studies have shown time and time again that First Nations have a really good idea of how to predict and prevent forest fires from spreading should there be a fire. There's been studies done on guardian programs in the Yukon and in Australia that shows that when we work with First Nations to protect our forests, we can actually reduce the risk of forest fires from being as devastating as they're becoming now. Forest fire behavior can be predictable as long as we know and we work with the proper teams and different First Nations. We work together to make sure we're all on the same page, and we know that we can reduce the risk in ways, in traditional ways that have been successful in other parts of Canada and other parts of the world. Thank you.
Moving along. Question 13. This is a question about future jobs. Will your party support efforts to achieve a just transition away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, and geothermal? How will you ensure that no one gets left behind during that transition? And we're going to start with Chris Hergesheimer.
You can be committed to something, but I don't think you can ensure that no one gets left behind. There's going to be people that get left behind. Can we mitigate that? Absolutely. We have an incredible opportunity in front of us to make this transition hopeful, to make this transition optimistic, to make it extremely economically valuable, and to make it ecologically sound. We've got this picture in our mind that it's a Mad Max, that someday everything's just going to shut down, and for a decade or more we're going to have to roam the streets looking for gasoline. It doesn't have to be like that. But we have to start somewhere. And that means no more investment over there. We say it's a free market. It's a free market. Let the capital go where it goes. Meanwhile, we are subsidizing sunset industries and not investing that money over in the clean energy transition. There are good jobs. There is factories full of creativity. We retooled factories in 3 months to create things of war in the world, in the Second World War. Imagine what we can do now if we decided collectively that that was the future. The future is in a knowledge economy. There was so much value built from the resource sector here in this province, and it's so important, and I feel that when people tell me about it. But it cannot be the story of our future. That story has to be one where we make investments and we understand the complexity of where we're going, and we bring as many of us along as we can. Retraining, direct subsidies, investments, watch where the capital goes, and it will go there, and we will be so proud of what we've created in 10 years from now. Thank you.
The BC NDP in the platform for this election, and they have already been working on this prior to this election, has doubled the skills, trades, jobs, and also the educational opportunities that go along with that. There is a fund, as I mentioned earlier, to transition workers who typically have worked in the forestry industry or some of our more traditional industries in BC into cleaner industries like solar and wind. Those are the two big ones that the province is really focusing on right now, because those are the ones that have shown the most progress and has the most entrepreneurial spirit coming forward. Tons and tons of green energy companies proposing these wonderful projects with wind and solar, and this is what we really need to focus on as well. Our number one industries on the Lower Sunshine Coast are still the mill, hospital, healthcare, and our schools. So those are still education and healthcare. Those are still our biggest industries here. And also, if we're building more homes and we're building infrastructure and helping people, helping families come here and live here and build good lives in good homes with good jobs, we have to support them with new, innovative industries and jobs that they can take advantage of here. So by offering more public sector jobs, some innovative clean energy jobs, and some great new entrepreneurial private sector jobs, I think that we can turn this into a really clean economy and build our jobs and get our young kids engaged and working here, perhaps even getting a factory home center here where we can actually build those factory homes here and be a hub for this part of the province for creating those opportunities. As we said, anything is possible as long as we work together and we have a vision and we're devoted to doing better. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now this is going to be, oh, sorry. Well, okay, go ahead.
Just got a comment on the factory jobs. We have to maybe phone Mr. Trudeau. Maybe we can get some money for factories in BC. It takes me back to a couple of stories. I was working in Calgary back in 2000, and this is interesting for those that know Calgary. They have a trolley system downtown, and it's electrical, right? The interesting part about that is all the power they use on their trolley system is generated in Pitcher Creek. It's a wind turbine farm just outside of Calgary. So here you have the number one energy fossil fuel town in Canada, and they power the public transit downtown with windmills. The other component for those that travel in the province is up at Tumbler Ridge. I was up there 3 years ago, and Tumbler Ridge, as you know, had 5 coal mines. I think there's one still working, but that was kind of their bread and butter. But as you drive into Tumbler Ridge now, it's just ringed with huge wind turbines. There must be hundreds of them up there. And it's kind of apocalyptic looking. It's like War of the Worlds, these massive turbines and windmills turning, but it's really neat to see the juxtaposition of the coal industry fading and the wind turbines coming in. But I did manage to have lunch with a couple of the maintenance guys that were working there, and just talking about their profession. because I was really intrigued about how they go up the tower and how they, what they gotta take up there and what, because it's a long ways, right? And they gotta do all the maintenance work on it. But really excited about what they were doing and how they were contributing to their livelihood and where they took it. So those kinds of things are great examples of what we're doing right now. And it just shows what we can do further in terms of furthering the photovoltaic panel systems that we use in our single family homes now. There's lots of installers on the Sunshine Coast, courtesy of Mr. Olson. And not to mention the wind component. So those are two essential elements in terms of our energy supply system that we will all work towards in terms of in the future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Chris.
Are we at closing remarks?
No, we have one question and then we're going to go that way. And off with, this is question number 14. And we're going to start with Chris Ferguson. Chris 1. This is a question about youth, jobs, and the climate crisis. If you are elected, will you support the expansion of BC's very small Youth Climate Corps to provide climate-related training and employment for youth? And we start with Chris 1.
Excellent, yeah, so this is an area that's really close to my heart. I've spoken about it on a number of occasions and here today, asking the rhetorical question of where are the youth, but more importantly, understanding, living with youth and understanding what they respond to. And they don't respond to fear. They don't respond to doom. They respond to hope and optimism. And so when we look at a climate core like this, let's get young people back in the conversation. And in fact, let's center young people in this conversation. Because we're on our way out at some point. Even me, you know? I want to see youth being the entrepreneurs that I've talked about. I want to see the training and the education and the encouragement and the enthusiasm coming from the youth, because you know what? Whether it's public-private partnerships, social enterprise, traditional business, not-for-profit sector, they are the ones that are going to get us out of this. They are the ones who are going to build a future that they can be proud of. And I haven't said one time tonight the BC Greens for this, because the BC Greens have always stood for that. I rest my case on that. The BC Greens are about a different story, and it's a story about youth. It's a hopeful story. It's a story of resilience. And we are asking so much of them over the years. It's up to you to fix this. It's up to you. If you don't fix this, this is on you. That's a lot of pressure. Let's flip that. Let them be creative. Let them get after it. And that's how you get lasting, systemic change.
Thanks, Chris. Randy.
The BC NDP has always supported the Youth Climate Corps. In fact, it is doubling the number of youth climate leaders in the province. These are people from the age of 17 to 30 years old, and the government pays them a good living wage to go out and make climate change actionable in either clean energy jobs or industries or ideas, and we support them in supporting and fighting climate change. So it is something that is absolutely core and integral to give young people something that is hopeful, because it is so anxiety-ridden for so many people. I think we know so many young kids who actually literally have anxiety and mental health issues over the state of our climate. So to give them something that leads to positivity and leads to positive change and leads to a better climate and a better health, it's something that BC NDP has always supported and will continue to support, and in fact, we're doubling down on it as well. Thank you.
My apologies, I'm not familiar with the Youth Climate Corps. I'm not, but it sounds really interesting, and certainly something that I would be interested in talking to my 10 grandchildren about at some particular point, but they're still a little young for that maybe. But I did graduate out of Red River Community College in Winnipeg, which is comparable to your BCIT, and one of the things that we are very strong in terms of advocation is the expansion of all of our those post-secondary schools in terms of talking to the young people, particularly in the high schools right now, about possibilities about where they're going to go after grade 12. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of conversation about encouraging them to possibly look at trades. So we talk about trades in terms of climate change, just like the guys I was talking about on the gals in the earlier comment about the wind turbines and installing panels on roof systems. There's a huge need for it, and it's what we got to do is we got to make it, like for the younger people, it's like a cool thing to do. I mean, a lot of young people think if they're not going to university, okay, they're not quite making the grade. And I know we're doing way better at that right now, but to really emphasize and to encourage them to think, you know what, a trade, what we call a red seal now, in the old days it was called journeyman or whatever, is really a great way to go through life. I was talking to the guys up in the mill, the old timers, last week, 35 years in the mill, and you know, in their environment, the wages they made, they raised a family, they loved their life. And they worked with their hands. And that's a great way to go. I mean, and so I totally support it big time. Thank you.
Well, thank all three of you. You've demonstrated that you can all three think on your feet. None of these questions were given to them ahead of time. In fact, I didn't see them ahead of time. But we've now come to the wrap-up. We're asking them to do a 1-minute wrap-up. And we're going to reverse the order as we started out. So Chris Hergesheimer is number 1.
At the 11th hour. Oh, this is dangerous. 2 minutes with 1 minute. Oh my gosh, with no predefined question. Chris Hergesheimer, thanks for keeping tabs on me there, Chris. I want to spend this opportunity to say 2 things. Number 1, green has never been tried. And people say, green this, they can't do this, they can't do this. I don't believe you. I want to say the second thing, which is we've got a small team. I've been putting these hearts around town. You see heart pins. People say, oh, the green heart. I'm so proud of our team. We're doing stuff in this community. We're showing films. We're doing kids' art. We're having dance parties on the street. We're playing music. We're doing service in this community now. I'm not just asking for your vote. I'm asking you to believe that things could be different and that things could be better and we can change the system. But we cannot operate in this broken, polarized, binary system that we see at the provincial level. Who is happy with that? Not me, and I think things can be different. Thank you.
Well, I don't know if I can keep up to that, but anyway. I think the prevailing thing that I picked up since I've been on the road here for 6 months, back and forth, up and down, talking to so many people, is that there's a large number of people that are just dying for change. And this is not sort of just a passing thing, it's a huge thing. For instance, yesterday morning, again, I went down to the walk-in clinic on Cowrie at 8:30, because they open at 10 o'clock. And there was 35 people, again, like last weekend, waiting to get in. And it's not acceptable. They came from Garden Bay, they came from Wilson Creek, they came from Gibson's, and it's not good. So we can talk about medical coverage right now. We all know what's happening there. There's 1 million people with no doctors. We can talk about affordability. We can talk about mental health. We can talk about addiction. But people really want to see a change right now. The number 1 issue for a lot of people, particularly the younger people, is affordability. They are just, whatever age, that 30 age group is number 1 issue. Thanks a lot.
And last but definitely not least, Wendy Neal.
I just want to say thank you so much for coming today. I think the most important thing that we can do in this election is to vote. And I know it's going to be a tough decision for some people, it's going to be an easy decision for others, but I truly believe we are only as good as our last person who votes. So thank you for coming out, thank you for being so engaged. We're here because we love this place, and when we love something, we want to take care of it. And at the end of the day, I think we all want the same ultimate goals: a healthy planet and a safe place for our kids and our families and to grow old in. We just have different ways of trying to
On time. But I'd also note that each and every one of them concluded before the red card came up on lots of questions, so that we had a very efficient time. I'd like to thank the people at the question table who have been putting into me, and those who helped to set up, and we'd invite you to help put chairs away when we're done. Most of all, I thank you, because without you going out back into the communities that we all live up and down this coast, talking to your friends, your family and neighbors, that's what's going to make a difference in this election. Regardless of what your political leanings are, you now have a responsibility to say, look, I went to the Roberts Creek Hall and I heard all three of them, and they all three did a great job. And go back and talk to your friends, and talk to your neighbors, and talk to the people you work with. Because you now become the emissaries for the questions and the sentiments that have expressed here today. I'm not sure if, Rich, do you want to do some wrap up, or do we just want to bowl it? All right. The show is officially over. Thank you all.